Facebook. All right. So, Assalamu alaikum everyone. Thank you very much for joining us. जैसा कि आप लोग गेस कर चुके होंगे, जो आज का हमारा मौजू है वो बहुत ही दिलचस्प है. It's going to be about plants and how do they talk with each other. तो before we jump right into the talk, मैं थोड़ा सा आपको बता दूं कि communication जो होती है इसके मुतालिक बल्कि अभी ख्वारिज़मी साइंस सोसाइटी ने recently we also did a course जिसका नाम था Decoding Languages, which was an introduction to linguistics. तो वो भी जो था वो इसी बारे में था कि ना सिर्फ इंसान बल्कि बाकी भी जो जानदार होते हैं वो कैसे आपस में बात करते हैं, वो कैसे इंटरेक्ट करते हैं और लैंग्वेजेस इस सब में क्या रोल प्ले करती हैं. अब ऑब्वियसली हम ये सब जो बात करना, आपस में कम्युनिकेट करना, कोई भी बात को कन्वे करना, हम इनको मोस्टली एसोसिएट करते तो हैं अपने यानी इंसानों के साथ और दूसरे जानदारों के साथ. लेकिन क्या कभी आपने सोचा है कि कितना मजा है अगर जो है पौधे यानी कि वो भी बात करते हो. तो ठीक है, मे बी वो हमारी तरह लैंग्वेज नहीं यूज करते होंगे, लेकिन इट कैन बी कि वो किसी और मीडियम से जो है वो कम्युनिकेट करते हो, कि चाहे किसी को धूप की कमी है या किसी की सॉइल में कोई कमी है या कुछ भी. फॉर एग्जाम्पल इवन एक इंसेक्ट ने अगर किसी को अटैक किया है तो कितना मजा है अगर वो भी आपस में कोई उनकी भी कम्युनिकेशन चैनल हो. तो इसी से रिलेटेड आज का जो हमारा वेबिनार है वो होगा. और जो हमारे गेस्ट हैं उनका नाम है डॉक्टर मोहम्मद उस्मान रशीद. उन्होंने रिसेंटली पीएचडी अपनी कंप्लीट की है इन एनवायरमेंटल इकोलॉजी फ्रॉम यूनिवर्सिटी ऑफ ईस्टर्न फिनलैंड, और जहाँ पे वो अभी फिलहाल एज अ पोस्ट डॉक रिसर्चर काम कर रहे हैं. इससे पहले उनका मास्टर्स भी एनवायरमेंटल इकोलॉजी के अंदर है, और उससे पहले उन्होंने लम्स के अंदर बायो में अंडरग्रेड अपना मुकम्मल किया हुआ है. अब मजीद इनकी रिसर्च किस बारे में है और ये पौधों पे या इकोलॉजी पे या इकोलॉजी होती क्या है या एनवायरनमेंट और प्लांट्स का क्या रिलेशन होता है, इस सब के बारे में तो ऑब्वियसली हमें डॉक्टर उस्मान खुद ही बताएंगे. सो विदाउट फर्दर डिले आई वुड लाइक टू वेलकम यू एंड अस्सलाम वालेकुम. और आप
Hello.
अपने शेयर कर सकते हैं. हेलो.
Okay, thank you. So I'm live. Okay, so I'll share my presentation here. Is it visible? So yeah, thank you very much, Mohsina, for the kind introduction. My topic for today is plant communication, and I'll first give a brief introduction of myself, which actually Mohsina has been very kind to give already. So I graduated from LUMS in 2012. I was a part of the first batch at LUMS SSE. And then I came to Finland for my master's in environmental biology, and apparently I stayed for my doctoral studies as well. I completed my doctoral studies in by the end of year 2020. The topic of my studies was the effects of climate change on plant growth and their communication. And currently I'm working on plant communication in 𝒑𝒎𝒏𝒕 seedlings in the same institute at University of Eastern Finland. So what is communication? Well, I was taught at a very early stage that every thing in science, whenever you're starting some kind of a scientific investigation, it should start with a good definition. And the definition I'm using here today for communication is the transmitting of a signal from a sender to a receiver. When it comes to signal transmission, there are different views in the ecology community of that whether the receiver should respond or whether the sender should benefit. But let's, for the sake of this presentation, stick to the very simple definition that communication is transmission of information from a sender to a receiver. And well, here I have a few visuals, for example, of what communication is like, say written or spoken language, or sign language, or even body language, or smell of good tea, which can make you happy, for example. So these are all a few ways we humans in our daily lives do communicate with each other And but how do plants convey a signal? Just think about this cup of tea, for example. What is it that gives its aroma? It was once a plant, and well, that is the aroma of the plant is basically a form of a signal. It was meant for something else. Well, now we are using it for tea and becoming happy, but there must have been some evolutionary advantage for the plant to have this kind of a scent or some compound stored in there. Or think about more common occurring of flowers. Like we all are very familiar with the sweet scent of flowers, or if we take a nice walk in a park or a forest, there's this something we consider the smell of freshness. The air is so fresh and you can smell it and you feel it, and it's quite refreshing sometimes. We all have that kind of an experience. And why is it that when we take a walk in a park or a forest, there is a nice smell out there? Or an even more common example for the city dwellers is when there is grass being cut and you can smell it about a block away. So what are all these things? These are actually the signals that the plants emit for communication with each other and with other organisms. And we generally in this environmental ecology, we refer to these as the volatile organic compounds. So these are organic compounds that are synthesized by plants. Most of them are isoprene based, which is a very simple 5-molecule, 5-carbon molecule. And these are volatile, so they are easily evaporated from the surfaces of plants. But it's a very controlled kind of signals. It's a blend of plenty of similar compounds that are emitted. So let's see what's going on there. So one thing I have already established for you, that the plants communicate through these kind of volatile organic compounds. So why do they communicate? A very good and again, a common example of plant communication is when they communicate with other organisms. For example, a flowering plant sends a signal for a bee pollinator. For when it blossoms, it gives a nice scent. So the bee comes, it gets some nectar, and in the process, it pollinates the flowers. And how does the bee find this flower? Basically, there are these volatile organic compounds that smell nice even to us, and also they are attractive for these bees. And one very interesting thing I have recently read that I would like to add here is that it has been observed that many plants can imprint on the bees. So the first flower that a bee lands on in the morning and gathers pollen from, that plant imprints itself on that bee. So for the rest of the day, that bee is going to go to the similar flower, preferably. Not always entirely goes to the same flower, the same kind of flower, but it does prefer other flowers of the same species. In this way, the flowers have actually hijacked the bee for their own task. The bee gets the food, and the plant makes sure that its pollen is delivered to its own species. And it's a fascinating thing. And actually, currently, we don't know how the plant manages to hijack the system of the bee. Anyhow, so one of the very common examples that we observe of plant communication in our daily lives is how plants attract these pollinating bees for their own purpose. Another way volatile organic compounds are involved in protecting plants is they are toxic to any fungal or bacterial infections, or they are toxic to any insects that may come and feast on the plants. Furthermore, these plants can actually signal predatory or parasitic wasps that will come and feast on these herbivore insects. So not only do the plants communicate with with insects that are feasting on them or those that pollinate, they also can call for help. So in this visual here, this wasp is being signaled by the plant that come eat this insect away from me that is eating me away. And this phenomenon does not only happen above ground, it also happens below ground. So these volatile organic compounds are being emitted not only above ground in the air, but they're also being emitted below ground when an insect comes to eat on the roots of the plant, or pathogenic fungi or bacteria infect the roots of the plant. The same process happens even below ground. Furthermore, plants can recognize their own species, and when they are under attack from a pollinator, herbivore or pathogenic fungi or any kind of a threat, they are able to communicate this to their neighboring plants, and they can tell them to ramp up their secondary metabolite defense system. So the plants nearby actually become distasteful by gathering more toxic compounds in themselves. They haven't been attacked yet, but because a nearby plant was attacked by an insect, it gave a warning signal through these volatile compounds to a neighboring plant. And now the neighboring plant will be more protected. Before any insect comes to eat it, it's already ready to defend itself. One example of this that I read in a book that I will later mention was that when it has been observed that when giraffes in Africa are feasting on the top canopy level of the trees, they don't eat too long on a single tree, because when they start eating the tree starts to accumulate more of these distasteful and toxic compounds, and thus the giraffe has to move forward to another tree. But one observation that has been made is that they don't go to the tree that is adjacent. They often go a few trees away and start eating some other plant that is further away from the plant that they were eating. And the reason behind that is that the giraffe knows that the nearby plants have been warned of its existence, and they have actually already increased the level of distasteful compounds in their leaves. So it's useless to go eat on the nearby plants. Also, one observation that has been made is that they move upwind. So downwind, these signals travel further. So they actually try to move upwind so they don't have to hop over too many trees. So what else plants can talk about? Plants recognize their own siblings from other plants, and they actually can defend their territory by giving off warning signals to other species below ground and above ground. One example of this that we observe in our forests, especially rainforests, are very well known for this kind of a canopy shyness. So you have plants that are very dense, but when you look from the ground level upwards, you can actually see that they never meet each other. Their branches have a separation in there, and that's because they keep giving warning signals that they defend their territory. And this phenomenon does not only happen above ground. There's also a similar phenomenon that happens below ground, that if the roots come too close of another species, the plants can signal them to go away. And in extreme cases, they can actually release toxic compounds into the soil that can kill the other plant. So it's like a battle going on below ground for resources. And this phenomenon is referred to as allelopathy. It's a very, very interesting phenomenon, in fact. Now, I will briefly talk about how we study these VOCs, because we cannot see them, we cannot smell them always. We can smell them sometimes, very often, but we can't smell the minute differences there. So we have developed this eavesdropping mechanism whereby we absorb I'll briefly just talk about the GCMS and adsorbent tubes. PTR-TOF is a bit, I think, in my opinion, a bit more complicated, but if you like, you can later ask me a question about that, and I'll gladly answer whatever much I know about it. So what we do is that these are some pictures that I have taken from my own work, and since I had some space on the slide, I'd put a picture of myself there. So we take some plants, what we want to study, and we put them in a plastic bag, as can be seen. This process can be done for shoot very easily, or even roots, as you can see. And we have developed methods of taking our this kind of absorption system out in the field, and we can also do live absorption from actual growing trees out in the forest or in the field, and see what they're emitting. So we put them in a bag, and then we pass some air through that bag, and there is air going into the bag. It gathers the volatile organic compounds, and on the other end, we make a hole, and we put one of these 10x tubes that has an adsorbent in it. So when the air passes through that, the volatile organic compounds get stuck to the adsorbent inside the tube, and then these tubes are kept cold so the chemicals don't start to go away. These are volatile compounds, so they're very easy to dissolve, and then in the lab we put it through GCMS. GC stands for gas chromatography, and MS is mass spectrometry. It's actually quite a standard machinery, just single machine, basically composed of 2 units. One part is GC and the other part is mass spectra. And then we get our this kind of a gas chromatogram, where if you can see, all these peaks are compounds that are being emitted. So in plant language, each of these compounds is very important. There are compounds that are emitted in larger quantities, and then there are compounds that are emitted in smaller quantities. And a single communication signal is a blend of all this. It's not one compound means something. It's different proportions that are present in a single blend is what a single signal is composed of. It's a language. They change this profile, we call it emission profile. They change it if there is a cue, like there is a baseline emission, and then there is emissions that are triggered due to some stimulus. So we use this method, and we can see what the plants are saying. And what do we find? That's more important. So I already mentioned that there's a signal which we refer to as cry for help when the plant is under attack. And then there is a signal that intimates the nearby plants of same species that they should ramp up their defenses. But in addition to all that, the plants are actually always emitting these kind of signals. They're telling their neighbors and the other organisms in their vicinity how good of a health they're in. If it's too hot for them, if they're running out of water, and if they actually detect a nearby plant being malnourished, they actually send a different kind of signal to, and even there are below ground networks whereby they can actually transmit some nutrients to these plants. I will not go into the details of those below ground networks. It's a bit more complicated, but those are usually formulated through the roots and mycorrhizal fungi that are associated with the roots. And basically, we have found that any kind of physical feature of their environment, above ground or below ground, existence of another plant, existence of another herbivore, any kind of insect, induces changes in the baseline profiles of plants, baseline volatile organic compound profiles of these plants. And it's not only above ground, it's also below ground. So there is a language going on. There's a lot of talking going on above ground, and there's a lot of talking going on below ground. So when something is eating the plant above ground, even the roots actually start to tell nearby roots about it, and they may even start to get nutrients from other plants because some insect is eating their leaves. So it's a very complicated and fascinating network that's present there. And the next thing is that why are we so interested in this in studying these signals, and how are plants actually in danger when it comes to the global change that is going on, the global warming. The problem is that the baseline emission system of plants is being disrupted massively with changes in temperature, the precipitation methods, the gaseous pollutants that we toss in the air from industry or car exhausts. They end up either mimicking these signals, or they alter these signals, or let's say they just prevent their diffusion across. So if a plant is in a very polluted environment and there is these kind of unburnt carbon or buckyballs, let's say, or other kind of particulate matter in the air, it will interfere with the diffusion of these compounds from one plant to another. Another way these compounds, the communication signals are attenuated in the air are also the oxidizing agents that are present. For example, ozone. In Pakistan, especially, the ozone levels in the peak hours are very high. It's dangerous it's a phytotoxic chemical. It's already dangerous for the plants. So they actually cannot produce these volatile organic compounds as efficiently. And when they do, ozone is a very good oxidizing agent, and it actually decreases the efficiency of the signal. It depletes the signal, first of all, and so these volatile organic compounds don't even transmit much further. In addition to that, any changes that we make to the soil, for example, fertilization, it also affects the production of these volatile compounds. I have published some papers actually where it has been shown that the volatile organic compounds emissions decrease below ground when we add these fertilizers there. So they cannot effectively communicate with other insects that or prevent themselves from herbivore infections or fungal infections below ground. Also, if in higher temperatures, plants actually tend to emit a lot of these stress signals, which is a lot of burden on vegetation generally to invest a lot of carbon resources into just production of these signals. So anthropogenic effect is something that I'm personally very eager to study in case of these volatile emissions and how they are affected. And currently my work is also based on directed towards that. How can humans actually benefit from knowing all this, that how plants communicate with each other? One very common example of that is the mosquito repellent. I don't know if any of you have ever checked what is there in the mosquito repellent, but I hope that all of us have used it at some point to protect ourselves from the stings of mosquitoes. So the mosquito repellent generally has this compound limonene, which is one of the compounds that I've repeatedly seen being emitted by the pine trees that I have studied, both above ground and below ground. And one of the very important applications of this work is that we can use these blends. If we understand them well enough, we can use these blends to instead of pesticides. How? As I mentioned previously, that plants are able to send a signal to parasitic wasps that they can come and eat off the insects that are feeding on the plant. So for our crops, if we can identify those signals, we can already apply them into the fields, and that will already keep away the herbivore insects. And whatever herbivore insects still do infest our crops, there will be this signal out in the air that more and more wasps will be signaled to come to that crop and eat away all those herbivore insects. There is a push-pull method of cultivation that we are studying, which is that two different crops are planted. So one of them actually is more attractive to the insect herbivores, that is less desirable of a crop, so it acts as a bait. So the herbivores will feast on the less desirable crop or plant whose leaves we don't desire. Maybe it's in our research group, there's some research going on 𝒂𝒏𝒕, which is this shaljam, or 𝒑𝒍𝒂𝒏𝒕 broccoli is grown together, and we see how the efficiency of the production of the crop is better when they're grown together. And the basic reason behind it is that they sort of between them, they manage these pests amongst themselves using their VOC signals. Also, you may have seen these insect traps. Like over here, we have these yellow colored, brightly colored, but they also have a scent on them, so they can attract all these insects. Instead of the insects going to the plant, we can actually mimic the scent of a plant onto a trap, and instead of the herbivore insects going to the plants and eating them away, they go and they get trapped on these kind of insect traps. Besides that, these VOCs are actually in the higher atmosphere. They help formation of clouds, so they actually do counter the global warming itself. It's a negative feedback. So in the higher atmosphere, they react in the presence of UV light with other compounds, and they form aerosol particles, and around which acts as a seed for the cloud formation. And clouds, as we know, are actually one of the best reflectors of radiation. And of course, we need clouds for water cycling and such. And this is one of the things that some of my colleagues are also working on, studying the cooling effect of the VOCs. And the more the plants we actually have, the increased VOC emissions we get, the better chances of countering global warming we have. It's not only through absorption of carbon dioxide that trees actually are able to help with global warming. It's also through these kind of communication signals that once they are out in the upper atmosphere, they actually form clouds, and they help with reduction of the radiation entering the atmosphere. Also, another important feature is that these actually are there are tons of there's tons of carbon being emitted by forests into the air as volatile organic compounds. So this helps us understand the missing links of the carbon cycling on the surface. So there's a lot of carbon that the primary reason behind global warming at the moment is that humans have dug up stored carbon in the form of fossil fuels, and by burning, we're tossing it in the air, and that's basically increasing the amount of carbon dioxide and some other greenhouse gases like methane, etc., in the atmosphere. And here by studying these VOC compounds, we can actually understand better how the whole natural carbon cycle works at the surface level, and what is it that we can harvest out of it, in fact. And also, one very interesting thing is that by understanding these VOC signals, we can understand the sexual reproduction of the mature trees in the forest. Trees live a very long life, and they don't always fruit. And this is something, since a lot of Finland's industry is based on trees, and it's sort of important to manage forests. Most of the Finnish forest is managed for the production of timber. So through study of VOCs, one of the things we can actually see is how and when do forests start to produce seeds. And because they don't always, not all the trees have annual flower production. Sometimes they take a gap year, they take several years of gap year. For example, there is a species of spruce that grows here. It makes some beautiful red colored flowers, but you don't see them very often. You don't see them every year. I have, in my 9 years stay here, only seen them once. And the entire population across the country and beyond starts to make these flowers all at once, all in the same year. And none of them is left uninformed that this is the time we're going to do it. So we can actually listen into the conversation of the trees and predict what's coming. So because VOCs is actually how they tell each other that this is what we're going to do. This is when we're going to start making flowers and so on. So this is basically some short introduction kind of I wanted to give about how and why plants have this kind of communication signals and what kind of signals there are. And I have some list of papers here. It's only a very short list compared to the material available out there, but there are some very exciting recent papers, especially this Rika Rinnan's lab has in Copenhagen has done some excellent work on how soils are absorbing volatile compounds. I have mentioned here 2 of my own papers, and actually one paper of mine with Rick Kerben in the US is mentioned here. All some way or another refer to the plant communication signals below ground and above ground. So I would, for the scientific community listening to this talk, I would encourage that you go check these papers out. And for students and others who are not very well versed with reading articles, I have a few books here. My absolute favorite is this book by Stefano Mascuno. This is The Brilliant Green. I think the book was originally written in Italian, but its English translation is splendid. Very exciting book. A more tamed version of the of science behind these this plant communication is written in this Hidden Life of Trees by Peter, and I actually have it here with me. And some of the stories I told you about plants, I took them from this book because I think this person has managed to tell the story of plants very effectively and in very simple language. Some other books I would recommend are this one book that is I Contain Multitude. It's beautifully written by a science journalist. And well, there's the list. So you can access them. Unfortunately, as far as I know, none of these books are available in Urdu language, only in English as of yet, but I hope someday someone translates these books for a general population of Pakistan. I would really want to buy these books for my parents. And that sort of concludes my talk. I would encourage any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much, Dr. Usman, for this incredible talk. Like for me personally as well, it was very enlightening कि किस तरह पौधे आपस में बात करते हैं, और खास तौर पे kind of sad also कि how we're affecting this very natural process by global warming and climate change and everything. So we have a couple of questions. सबसे पहले कोमल बशीर पूछती हैं कि so when a plant is cut, do they feel any pain? Like, what is their typical response?
Okay, so the question of pain implies that it's a different sense, whether they have the sense of pain. And it's questionable. One cannot equate the senses of plants to the senses that we humans have. And actually, one of these books that I have mentioned here, that is one of my favorites, in fact. This book mentions that plants do have all the senses that humans have, plus 15 others. So some scientists would say that plants do feel pain. I am of the view that they feel it, not necessarily is it a pain.
So like we can say it's still something that is being researched on, and we're actually exploring ke hota kya hai asal mein. So Masuma asks a very interesting question. I also have the same question. How do basically plants and trees feel when human beings talk to them? How do they respond when talked to? Like we have heard a lot के like indoor plants का बहुत फर्क पड़ता है आपके माहौल पे घर के, और उनको बहुत फर्क पड़ता है कि आपका किस तरह का माहौल है. So how true is that? And does it only happen in certain kind of plants? Yeah, is that true for every plant?
Okay, this is actually also very interesting. I was on, I would refer to the same book, this one by Stefano. It's splendid. And he does talk about this when he says, he talks about the senses in plants, and he is of the view that plants do listen and respond. I actually agree with him. At my own place, I have about 60 plants in my home here, besides the plants that I work with, and I do talk to them often. Although I don't totally agree that they grow better. Sometimes, no matter how much I talk to them, they die. So it is still something that is being researched, that whether plants respond to sound cues. There are some very strong evidence that they do respond to sounds. In fact, some people play music to their plants. In my personal experience, playing Coke Studio does help, at least with my mood. So, so yeah, I would say that based on what I have read, plants do tend to respond, but this question is still out there. It's a debate, and something that can be studied in further detail.
All right, that's interesting in itself as well. So even though I know that you try to keep this very simple and something that is understandable for the laypersons as well, so Sohail Yusuf साहब जो he's very interested कि आप अगर अपनी research को थोड़ा और elaborate कर दें, like what exactly you've done and what you plan to take it forward.
Okay, so my primary research throughout my master's, PhD, and well, until PhD, end of my PhD, was based on these small Scots pine trees, whereby there's a lot of information available as to how these trees respond to, let's say, warming alone, or nitrogen deposition to soil alone, or ozone alone. For example, there's a lot of literature out there from 1990s and throughout this period that people have started to study how forest trees respond to increasing temperature or increased carbon dioxide. So my project was to study up to 4 different physical factors at once. So there was ozone, there was increased nitrogen in the soil, there was I'm forgetting what else was there. There was herbivore feeding on the plants, and temperature. So did I cover 4? Nitrogen deposition to soil, temperature, ozone, and herbivore feeding. So there were these 4 physical factors that we manipulated in a field experiment. Like in an outdoor system, we had ozone generators in the field. We had heating elements installed above the plants, and we studied how the plants react over a period of 3 years, not just above ground, but also below ground. And it's how do they respond in terms of growth, in terms of their structure, in terms of their volatile emissions. So all of these things were studied. And there are 2 papers, and if the slides are going to be available, there are 2 of the papers that I have mentioned of where I'm the first author. And there's this paper which is written by 𝒑𝒏𝒕, one of my colleagues, which talks about also the same kind of experiments. So that's what I was doing until the end of my PhD. And currently I'm establishing a new system where we study the plant-to-plant signaling, how plants talk to each other. So I'm establishing a tabletop setup, and hopefully it will be completed by the time it's spring, which happens much later in Finland, about May-ish. There will be enough temperature outside, and the trees are actually, even if I'm conducting an experiment indoors, the trees are programmed genetically to not start growing or responding to cues until mid-April, May or something, like quite late. So in that experiment, what I will be studying is that we give stimulation to plants to produce these volatile signals, and we put another plant in its vicinity, and we study how that plant that is not given the stimulus responds to the VOCs that are being emitted by the induced plant. So there will be 2 plants in a chamber. One will get an insect to feast on it, and then we will see how the other plant responds. And we will do this more specifically under different environmental conditions. For example, they can be cues, a different kind of air quality. There can be different kind of humidity that we will manipulate and see how it affects.
Right. Thank you so much for explaining your research. तो एक और सवाल है कि जिस तरह पाकिस्तान एक यानी कि एग्रीकल्चरल एक मुल्क है mainly. So do you think कि अगर हम further plant communication के ऊपर research को promote करें या something, so does that somehow relate or benefit our agriculture as well, or that's something else?
Can you please repeat the question? Sorry, I didn't get it.
But basically, do you think that further research on plants communication and VOCs would somehow benefit the agriculture produce of our country? Does that somehow relate to it if we are able to exploit these factors or understand them better?
Actually, in Pakistan, I'm actually unaware of any work going on this front. And it's very disturbing, honestly. And Pakistan, not just in terms of agriculture, that's not the only thing Pakistan produces. Pakistan has some forests still out there. And this kind of study is, first of all, as I mentioned, there are applications of this work in agriculture. As I've previously, actually, when I was at LUMS, in fact, there was a project I was a part of only momentarily, where a drug was being designed for specifically targeting certain pests in fields. I don't exactly remember the details of it. It was in silico project, so we were studying the interaction of that drug with acetylcholine receptors. The aim was that we specifically target the pests and not the bees. So when we are using pesticides, many times we're just killing everything good and bad, which is not good for ecology. So using this, as I was explaining, that when we have, if we understand these signals better, we can actually replace this kind of the VOC blend for pesticide possibly in future, where we can give a signal to the insects to not come to the field because there's nothing tasteful for them here, or we can hijack the cry for help before there is this infestation of insects in the trees. We can already release a cry for help out there, so there's wasps already present, so it controls the amount of pests that we get on the field. So yes, in Pakistan, we should study, and we should not rely on other countries to come and tell us that this can be done. Pakistan has amazing research institutes out there. NIPG is one of them. Punjab University has some very good places. LAMS itself is doing very good. We should explore this kind of research horizons so we can, improve our own base, do it specifically for Pakistan. In addition to this, I don't know any cataloging even being done on the trees that grow in the forests of Pakistan. Pakistan has several different types of forests. They're not only in the north, they're everywhere. There's rainforests, there are irrigated forests, and we don't always know. Of course, irrigated forests we know, but the naturally growing forests, there's very little information as to what grows there besides the major trees. So we need to invest some money into doing some research as to just understanding. Sometimes we get carried away and we want to look at the benefit for humans, but primarily if we understand things better, we can eventually turn it into our own benefit, even if we don't see it in the near future. So I hope I answered the questions.
Yeah, you did. That's actually a very thought-provoking thought that you shared. So indeed, I feel like Pakistan does need to invest more on its environment, and also because how vulnerable we are to the climate change, even though we do not really contribute to it. So it's very dangerous and alarming that how our forests and everything is at such a huge threat. So we also have Dr. Tariq with us, who's an associate professor at LAMS. So we're very honored that you joined us. So if you have any questions, thoughts, anything, so please, we welcome you to contribute.
Thank you very much, Mohsina. Assalamu alaikum, Usman. Such a pleasure to see you with a wonderful piece of work. Usman, मैं ये सोच रहा था कि in agriculture, just a follow-up to what Mohsina was saying. In orchards, we have a big problem of alternate fruit bearing. So in one year, they give better yield, and in next year, for example, they don't bear good fruits. It's economically a big hit to the farmer. So can we somehow measure VOCs, the compounds you're talking about in the orchards, to predict? First of all, definitely we have to develop a baseline for these plants, whether it's guava or citrus, whichever orchard it is, to establish a baseline of these compounds, which can be used as indicators of prediction for good fruit bearing. And if we can also determine the factors which induce these compounds in the good productive year versus non-productive years. How difficult such a study will be?
Actually, it's a very standard, it is going to be a very standard study. We just need dedicated orchard where we can conduct the study. Unfortunately, it will take long time. So in order to develop a baseline understanding, given that there isn't any already, we will have to see the plant behavior at least over a few years. As you're saying that some years it is one way, some other years it's a different way. So at least I think we need to, first of all, these emissions, baseline emissions, change during the year. So it's a different kind of a baseline emission profile for growing season. It's a different one for the fall season. It's a different one for the winter. So if there isn't any profiling done already, so we will have to observe how it changes over the year, and then we go deeper into the years that produced a good sort of yield, and then compare it to the ones where it wasn't as good. And while there can be many factors, we can get an answer about it, that while we are unable to manipulate the reason for it, we might at least see what's going on. So yeah, it's not going to be very difficult per se, just time consuming. And the process of trapping these VOCs into these tubes is actually pretty simple and straightforward. But I also mentioned this PTR-TOF. This is it stands for proton transfer reaction time of flight. So that actually, it's a machine that can be actually taken to the site, and it gives you an overall picture of what's going on. So this 10x tube method combined with the PTR-TOF can actually give a very sound picture of what's going on out in the field. One of these methods can be applied. Both of them is even better. But yeah, to answer your question, it's not going to be that difficult, except we need orchards that are dedicated to allow such kind of a study. And we don't mean harm to these plants. The farmer can actually do what they do, and we just occasionally visit there and take snapshot of the plant communication.
Another question I had was this limonene. You said they are produced above ground as well as underground as well.
Yes.
So is it known what's the role of this compound above ground or below ground? Why plant needs it underground as well?
Okay. I don't personally study the individual compounds and their roles, but also my understanding is that when plants emit any given compound, it's a part of the blend that is given off. Limonene seems, from my simple understanding that I've done so far, based on my reading and everything, it seems like a compound that is released as a part of the blend in it's a very common compound. It's always there. So it can be a repellent to just herbivores generally. And but then there are herbivores of these trees that are specialists. So they take these compounds as cues, actually. Instead of this compound being a repellent to that specific herbivore, it can be an attractant to that specific herbivore. So I cannot say that it's a repellent for insects and have my conscience clear, because there will be some insect or an animal out there in the nature that uses the same compound as a cue that you can come and feast on it. This is something important. And these compounds don't usually act individually in the nature. They act as a part of the blend. So unfortunately, I don't think I can give you a concrete answer to your question about limonene.
So can you think of strategy that we can somehow engineer a metabolic pathway or biochemical pathway in plants regarding these blends, and then if we can develop GM crops based on such a metabolic pathway, which can then repel the insects, the economically important insects? Is it possible?
Yes, I agree with you, and I think I wouldn't be wrong to say that I have given a thought on that front myself. There is a huge gap of knowledge here. We can hijack the pathways. We can eventually make the plants produce certain kind of a blend, sort of like constitutively, like all the time giving out the cry for help. But we understand plants very little on this front, to be honest. While there's so many papers out there on VOCs, there's still, I haven't come across any papers that that talk about molecular receptors inside the leaves or on the surface that recognize these compounds. So far, we only know one molecular receptor of ethylene that has been identified. None for monoterpenes or isoprenes or any of the other compounds that are actually more common. So also having a plant produce this kind of cry for help constitutively is a huge burden on its own carbon resources. So while we may be able to get rid of the insects by doing this kind of a GMO, it might already cost us a lot on the yield front, because plant was investing a lot of its carbon resources and producing that specific blend. If it was helpful for the plant to begin with evolutionarily to have this kind of a cry for help going on all the time, then it would have chosen to have to be that way. If evolution chose plants to be to have a different kind of a baseline and then have a different kind of a cry for help kind blend, it is a reason. So in my understanding is that yes, while it is very I have given it a thought, but I think there's a lot of gap of knowledge here. And if we think on those carbon allocation terms, we might actually lose a lot of yield by producing this kind of a crop that gives out this cry for help all the time. Alternatively, I think it's easier for us to mimic a blend in spray form or something and give it as needed. But okay, yes, you're right, this can be done.
So another question I was thinking about, when they produce compounds underground through their roots, they are definitely, and they must be attracting some microbes there, like in case of leguminous crops, which fix nitrogen. But let's say you are in a forest-like situation where there is a huge number of species are growing there, and there's no one preference for a particular species. So do you think underground they are also helping each other instead of just repelling to maintain the rhizosphere? They kind of are, while they are competing for nutrients, but they are also helping each other through releasing or producing these compounds below ground.
I'm glad you asked this question. This is exactly something I'm going to be working on in coming few years. And based on this, the literature that is available already, we know for a fact that plants do help each other underground, in the forest, and even in the crops. Roots are always, almost always associated with the symbiotic fungi called mycorrhizal fungi. And I mean, you may have observed some mushrooms growing in the forest floor. Those are the fruiting bodies of the mycorrhizal fungi very often. They can be, the mushrooms can belong to any fungi, but like that's, sometimes it is said that if the forest has mushrooms, it's an indicator of good health. And the reason behind that is that these are the fungi that from which this fruiting body is coming up is actually symbiotic fungi to the roots. And these actually form a very complex network. There is not one species of fungi associated with a single tree. There's many of them, especially in untouched forests. There's a single tree can reach many times its own roots reach, like it extends its reach to other trees, and one fungus can actually make connections to different trees, roots of different trees below ground. And through these, through the hyphae, or sorry, mycelia of the fungi, the trees actually share nutrients. One a carbon from one tree can actually seep into the through the roots to the mycorrhizal fungi, and it can be taken away to another tree. And there's this concept of mother tree. Again, I refer to one of these books that I have listed, this one, Hidden Life of Trees. This guy actually talks very beautifully, explains, in fact, the concept of a mother tree, which feeds other trees until they reach the full height. So yes, they do support each other, especially the trees that are their own kind. They can actually sense if it's lacking in nutrients or it's in not good health. So a tree that is in better health can actually transfer its own carbon products through mycorrhizal fungi to the other trees. And the tree can be very, very far away. Still, those networks below ground can reach. So while trees have this feature of allelopathy, whereby they can kill the nearby plants, they can also help nearby plants below ground.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Tariq, for your questions. And once again, thank you so much, Dr. Usman, for this very interesting talk. उम्मीद है कि इसके जरिए एटलीस्ट जो हमारे जो पार्टिसिपेंट्स थे जिन्होंने भी देखा वो कम से कम उनके अंदर एक किस्म की क्यूरियोसिटी तो पैदा हुई कि ये एक पूरा रिसर्च फील्ड है एंड हाउ ब्यूटिफुली एवरीथिंग इज कनेक्टेड, मतलब इकोलॉजी, ये दिस फीलिंग ऑफ कम्युनिटी प्लस आल्सो एवोल्यूशन एंड एवरीथिंग, लाइक इट्स ऑल इंटरकनेक्टेड इन नेचर. So once again, thank you very much for your time, and
thanks
thank
to
you.
you. Thanks to Dr. Sabih, he's watching, and especially thanks to Dr. Tariq, who spared his time. Dr. Tariq, I don't know, Mohsina, if you know, but he's a teacher of mine from LUMS, and I have learned a lot from him, especially the reason why I'm in research is the kind of research I was exposed to back in LUMS, and it can be attributed largely to Dr. Tariq. He used to be the head of department back in the day. And I really do thank him for everything in the past and for being here. I'm honored to have him here. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Usman. Thank you for being so kind and being so generous with your words. Thank you very much. Always pleasure to see you and always proud of all of you. You all are doing wonderful work, and your work is especially very different and very novel, very different, a new dimension. I wish we can start in Pakistan as well.
I hope so. I hope so.
Inshallah.
Let's all hope.
Good luck there. Good luck there.
Thank you very much.
All on this beautiful note.
Allah Hafiz.
Allah Hafiz, and thank you very much, everyone.